Absolutely golden. All right, mate. I guess we start from the start. How did you get on this whole fitness journey?
Oh man, well, we'll make this as concise as we possibly can. I get this question often, and I never really know how to fully answer it accurately. But it started with really a combination of two things. It started with I was in athletics very competitively at a young age. Um, so from the time I was maybe four, I was playing organized sports on teams. I played kind of the big three here in the States. So I played basketball, I played football, and I played baseball. And then I played that all the way in through school. Um, and then all the while I was playing at a very high level. I was pretty skilled, pretty gifted, but I had to work very, very hard. It wasn't that guy that naturally had, the best speed or the best power in any individual thing. I didn't have the most finesse. I didn't have the most athletic ability, but I just became very, very obsessive with fundamentals. And my dad and I together, we would beat those fundamentals to death. And because of being so fundamentally sound in those sports, that's what helped me to stay up at that top level all the way into the college level. So when I got into college, I was recruited to play baseball. And I played baseball my first couple of years of college. And then what happened at that point in time is around 14 or 15, I was very behind in development. Like I just didn't grow. I was very, very weak. I was very, very small. So I was basically a boy amongst men. And that caused a lot of problems, both emotionally with me playing in team sports because I was with my peers, but I kind of felt like I was on an island. And it bothered me. It bothered me being weak. So at that point in time, I remember having a conversation with my dad, who was like my right hand man. He was my best friend at the time, saying like, I got to do something just to catch up with these guys. And there was a part of him that said, well, Bryce, like you haven't grown yet, man. It's gonna come. And he said, but if you want to take kind of ownership of this, he had owned his own gym at the time. He said, just start lifting weights. So he was the first guy that kind of put me through the ropes. And my first memory of that was going down into the basement. We had a home gym built that he would use. And I was petrified of it. I was like maybe 5'4", 5'5" at 14 years old, and I was maybe like 110 pounds. My dad could take his thumb and his forefinger and put that around my bicep. Right, I had that small arms. I remember him taking me down the first time and said, "Well, you got to be able to manage your own body weight before you've earned the right to lift with weights." And I was like, "Okay." And so he said, "Okay, you know how to do a push-up?" And I said, "Sure." So he said, "We're going to do a push-up till you can't do them anymore." And he literally had me doing a set of push-ups to full failure until I was crying. Like I was just tears come out of my face, bawling my eyes out. And he kept making me do more and more forced repetitions. And that was my first experience. I hated it. But that animosity and that 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 friction that I had of not being able to do that made me become obsessed with that at the same time. So I balanced that with sports. And by the time I got to college and played baseball, I was starting to come into my own with lifting weights to where it became a little bit more of a priority. So by my sophomore year, I had to make kind of this choice of like which route do I want to go? Do I want to continue to push this baseball thing as far as I can, which was my first love, or do I want to get into this thing that I was not good at in the beginning, which is lifting weights? So I went right into the lifting weight route. I gave up the baseball thing sophomore year of college and went into lifting weights. And that's how that thing snowballed from there. I remember getting my first magazine from a family friend. At the time, it was called Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness. And there were guys that I looked at in there. I was like, this is attainable. Like, I can get to this. I know I can do this if I really focus. And so I put this goal out at 18 years old, that by the time I graduated college, I was going to compete in natural bodybuilding. And that was really the thing that kind of shoved me into putting everything I could into mastering this concept of working out or training or building muscle, however you want to categorize it. I dove in headfirst in every single way, every single shape and form that I possibly could. I became as robotic as I could. If it was nutrition, I tried a bunch of different things with nutrition. But I was like everybody else. I knew nothing about it. I had no guidance. In fact, I started out in the health related stuff in college, but I actually got out of that from a major standpoint. I ended up graduating with a sport management degree. So my degree is not even in exercise science. It's not in kinesiology. It's not in any of that stuff. That's all stuff that I dove into after I got out of undergrad, and kind of dove into this bodybuilding thing. So my first bodybuilding show was in '08. 2008. And that was the year that I graduated college. And then I continued to compete competitively, kind of through local, state, and national level in the NPC until 2017, which kind of led me to about 21 to 22 shows, somewhere around in there. And then at that point in time, I just started to get more of an interest of teaching people, through my mistakes, the things that I learned through all the education stuff that I traveled to, uh, all the continuing education that I did online, all the reading that I did with a bunch of coaches that I met through, who were further along than me. I just decided to pass that on. That's kind of what it's led me to now. So it's been a long deal. It's been 17, 18 years diving into this thing. But when people say, well, how do you get from one point to another? The thing that I always tell them is just start. I was 14, 15 years old. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I just knew I didn't want to be weak anymore. I wanted to figure this thing out. I was committed, and I had people all along the way that said, dude, you're so small, this will never be. And it ended up being. So, you can be that small guy. You can be that ignorant guy. You can be that dumb guy. You can be that weak guy, and you can completely shift it. And that's the beauty of training. Is part of it maybe is genetic potential, but the majority of it is tenacity, man. You just got to be freaking hungry to put the miles in. That goes for anything in life, but especially in training. I mean, it is true. Whatever you put into it, it will be reciprocated back to you tenfold with that consistency.
I think training is one of those things where you kind of need, and it is good that you have a bit of ignorance at the start, because it's just like you don't think about genetic potential, you don't think about anything. You're just like, oh, okay, this is a weight, it's 10 kilos, it's 10 kilos. I need to lift it, or it's 5 kilos or
Mm,
100 kilos or whatever it is. It's just like, all right, I'm just going to come in, I'm going to show up, I'm going to pay my dues, I'm going to go home, I'll focus on what I can right now, and then the next day is the next day, and I'll focus on that. And it is so
right.
true. You end up figuring it out on the fly. You just, oh, well, that didn't work, that was a mistake or whatever. Okay, cool. Well, I now know something that doesn't work, so I can now learn from that. So I'm in a better position simply because I started, tripped up, failed, made a mistake, did whatever. Everyone cuts out carbohydrates or cuts out fat, and then they're like, oh my God, I can't really function anymore. What's going on? It's like, oh yeah, I'm basically starving myself of a
Yeah.
macronutrient. That's probably not the wisest of things to do. There you go. You've learned some from what you're doing, and just
Yeah.
keep moving forward. And it is about tripping up along the way, and those trips are just lessons, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the reality is in the line of what we do, you are an experiment, and you have
Mhm.
to be bought into that experiment. Okay. And the whole role of any kind of experiment, whether you're in a lab or you're just in life, is you have to log it. And so people always ask when they feel lost, like, what do I do? Where do I start? How do I get going? And I always tell them two things. You need two things to kind of get this ball rolling. First off, you need a diary. We're
Yep.
not talking about a girl's diary that's got its little locket and everything like that. I'm talking about your man diary, the one that you take to the gym. You put all your thoughts, your feelings, and your PRs in that thing. And you write that literally like you're talking to yourself. Because what that's going to do is it's going to teach you how to track biofeedback without you even knowing. You're going to go in, you're going to learn that motivation is fleeting. You're going to learn that you hit PRs on days when you weren't feeling it. You're going to surprise yourself. So what it does is it helps refine you.
Mhm.
It kind of helps to get words on paper that sink in and go, oh my gosh, like, I can, if I'm consistent with these things, even without me knowing, look at all these variables that change without me knowing about it. I have mass that went on my legs and on my arms. That's all the cool stuff. I got stronger. That's all the cool stuff. But look at all these things that are consistently changing. Like, my volume's naturally going up without me knowing it. My exercises look to be a little bit more consistent without me knowing about that. It looks like I'm starting to get a little bit more confidence with my lifts and things like that. So that's the biggest thing is you need to track just without it, and I learned that honestly from reading a book back in the day from Frank Zane. Frank
Yep.
Zane said he had in his study from the time that he started competing as a teenager to the time that he retired, close to 50 years old, that he had an entire study that was full of just college ruled notebooks. And all it was that he called it his diary. And I'm like, well, if he's doing it, I have to do it. And that's all the information that I had. I didn't have anything more. He didn't tell me how to do it. I just knew I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to write everything I know down. And then that became more and more refined. And that in and of itself is a skill. You're refining that skill of tracking your data so that your data becomes more and more accurate. As it becomes more accurate, everything that you do in the gym and out of the gym progresses. That's the beauty of it. So ignorance doesn't matter. The data is what matters. But then the second thing on top of that has to be effort. You have to be willing to go to that status of uncomfortable. I know, the place that I come from, the biggest thing that I get is, I need to go down this form track. Everything needs to be perfect. And I say, no, you don't. That's not the first step. Okay. The only reason why I went down the route of getting into mechanics was because I was getting hurt and I wanted to continue to be able to train hard. And the only way to continue to train hard is to have a little bit better grasp, or a very specific grasp of how does the body work, and a little bit about anatomy, and then apply that to my training. And it made me be able to train even harder. So that was where I was at in that continuum of refining my skill. Mechanics and form, cleaning that up allowed me to have longevity. It's the only reason why I'm here today. All right. Otherwise, I just would be an injured, broken guy in a wheelchair. But the main component that I knew from the start was that if I look around in the gym, I want everybody to say, that guy looks like an idiot. He trains his ass off. That was always my goal. That's where I started. And I think that's a very important element today, is because yes, you can get by and coast and have results. And yes, you can, look pretty with your shirt off and post on Instagram and stuff like that. That's cool. Okay. Like that's very popular today. But if you don't have the effort in place, you're missing a variable that won't make any of the other variables that you start to bring in progress that skill. You'll just be making things more complicated than they need to be. Every variable outside of effort is literally to make effort more refined. How can I make effort better and better and better and better? So you're refining that skill of effort. So get good at collecting data and get good at figuring out ways to kick your own butt in the gym. If you can do those two things, I really don't see this whole genetic ceiling, right? You may not be the biggest, you may not be the strongest, you may never win a bodybuilding show, you may never turn pro in a sport, okay? Some of that is very, very much factored on genetics, but your limitation of progressing yourself, I don't see it. I don't.
Yeah, me neither. Like you see people PRing at 60, 70 years old of age, you know what I mean? And it's just like, well, how are they able to do that? Well, it's not because they walked in the gym and just did something they'd never been able to do before. It's because everything else is dialed in. And if any other sport, or people who aren't even into sport, just want to dabble in the whole health and fitness scene, can take anything away from the sport of bodybuilding, it's going to be that. Like the discipline of all of it combined, all of it. Like, we're going to do this so tomorrow night you can go in the gym and absolutely kick ass. But it's like, oh, well, I'm not in the gym. I was like, yes, but if you give yourself the most opportunity to get there at 100%, then you've got a higher opportunity to PR tomorrow, right? And they're like, yeah, okay, cool. I was like, oh, but you could also stay up till 2 a.m. playing video games and eating burgers. And then when you get there, you're probably going to feel like absolute shite. And then you're going to complain that you can't hit 70% for a double.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. Like,
absolutely.
Hey, take a leaf out of this book. I genuinely, like, bodybuilding competitors are one of the most mentally deranged yet mentally tough people on the planet.
They are.
110%.
And I'll take it even a step further. Of all the people that I've trained for, the last decade plus, I would argue to say that something encoded in the DNA of women that become competitive, or women that become really bought into aesthetically changing their body, they're the toughest people on earth. Guys have this bad thing looming over them. We all have it. We don't want to admit it. Some of us have gotten control over it, but we have this thing called an ego, right?
Yeah.
And we just cannot get that guy off of our shoulder to where it's like, well, last chest workout, I pushed the 120s for 11. So I have to go up to 130s. The reality is like, no, you don't. Okay. The only thing that you have to tell a girl is like, what am I getting in here for? And tell me when to go. And they'll never stop, especially as a trainer. If you're training a woman and you have their trust, they'll jump into a fire for you if it means that their body's going to change or they're going to get closer to their goal. And you can push them past that point of what you think their capability is, and they will stay in there. I have no idea what it is. I really don't. But I can tell you that of all the women that I've had, I've never had one, not one, not one single woman bail on a set where I look at them and say, we're going to take this to the brink and you can't come out of here until I say you're done. And they will do it every time. And I have a guy all the time that'll come in and say, I work really, really hard. Like I am the hardest worker, but I need some things. I need some concepts to bring my back up. It's like, okay, all right. So we'll dial some stuff in. And I'll say, okay, it's go time. We're going to do an actual working set here. But you got to stay with me. And we'll get to 8 to 10 repetitions. And they're like, I don't have any more. Like, well, I didn't say you were done, So it's that ego thing, right? We use it number one as a point of comparison to other dudes in the gym, but we also use it as a crutch, right? And I don't know if it's fixable, man. I'm not saying that I don't have it, but I'm just saying women don't, and they're way tougher than dudes. They are.
Totally. All you got to do is look at a lady who's pregnant, and she's absolutely destroying it, and you're just like, wait, hold on a minute. Like, you have a growing human being inside of you, yet you are dominating your workout and taking no shits. I need to sit down because the whole world is queasy and you might throw up because of sickness or whatever between sets. But at the same time, 2 minutes is up. That's it. You're straight back on the dumbbells and you're like, what is going on? And yet a dude will come in about, I've had a pretty stressful day. I'm like, that's why you're in the gym. Like, but I don't know. I'm not feeling it. I was like, look, I don't give a shit what you feel right now, mate. Like, look over there. Take some inspiration from her.
It's funny. It's true. It's just different mentalities. I've had women and men alike come into a session and they're like, I just want to be honest. Like, I haven't eaten, so I'm pretty much training fasted. Is it okay for me to train? I go, absolutely. But I'm glad you told me I might manipulate something, one or two things. And so the girl will be like, okay, full go, cool. And the guy will be like, I think I'm just too weak, man. Can we reschedule? I'm like, no, man, no, like life happens, right? There's no perfection day to day. This is a great lesson for you. If nothing else, like, we have to train. So it is. You only learn that stuff when you dive in head first and you just get around a bunch of people or you get a bunch of bodies in front of you. And that's the beauty of it. That's the thing that I've always loved about training in person. And I wish that everybody that trained in general, whether it's online or did consultations with people, would just take time out of their day or take a couple years to just train bodies, because you learn so much just from those conversations with those people that you end up applying to yourself, because they really are they're, for lack of better words, they're your dummies of trial and error. You get these theories, at least I do, in your own training, where you're like, maybe this is something that we can work with. It may be something with an exercise, or it may be a structure that you have to a workout or a block or whatever your training's like. And you go, I want to implement this on my test dummy here. And so you do, you talk to them openly about how you have this idea that'll help them, and they buy into it, and they either crash and burn or they do well. And the only way that you learn that stuff is if you do it with them in person, because that conversation, that back and forth, it helps with so many things. It helps with your training. It helps you articulate things to people that you don't have in person. But man, oh man, it helps your problem solving on the fly big time.
100%. And I always say, like, if you look into someone's eyes, it tells you everything you need to know. And you can't necessarily do that through a computer screen, or just through sending over a program on whatever platform you use, right? And you also get to identify some like psychological barriers too, because like someone comes in and they're like, no, I'm good. Don't worry, I'm good. And you can just tell something's up, and you get to read body language and then also the place that they come from. So cultural differences, and you just become an all round coach or trainer or whatever you call yourself. And then you can assess it and identify it in a much shorter time frame. So then there's less risk for injury. Me just going, okay, we're going to go hard today, and like ignoring all the signs rather than be like, oh, I had programmed, I'm going to kick this person's ass, but looking at them, they are really dragging their feet just to get here. Yet I know they're going to run through a burning building for me. So I'm going to cap what they want to do, but I'm going to push them a little bit, just a little bit. So I'm going to get that little bit, and then that's it. We're good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that you bring up a good point there about how, especially when we talk to people long distance, or you get into the habit of writing, programs and stuff like this, you get this concept that there's a blanket way, there's a blanket statement, there's a blanket exercise, there's, a blanket workout program, there's a blanket starter diet. And the reality is there isn't. I mean, from the cellular level all the way to the organism level, every single person is so independently different. And that's not even factoring the way they were raised. It's not factoring their current lifestyle. It's not factoring their stress. It's not factoring, certain psychological things that they may have be going on top of the physical experience that they have with the skill you're trying to teach them. So, this thing of training can be very, very complex, and it can be very simple. But your job as a coach, and I really firmly believe the things that you learn in person is you learn to take that complexity and oversimplify it. And that's when people really start to blossom. You have a person come to you that's really, really adamant and trying to learn. They're saying, what's this whole deal about a lengthened position and a shortened position of muscle? What's that mean? That's complex to them, but to you, it might be very simple. And if you were a person talking through consultation, like long distance, like you and I, you might say, well, that's a stretch position for a muscle, and that's a fully contracted position for a muscle. What about if a person has never felt that? The things that you get to taking a body and putting it into those physical places, you learn to verbally teach that stuff to long distance people as well. Or you learn how to, in a call like this, say, okay, well, all I want you to do, we're going to do that with your chest. I want you to come, I want you to take your shoulder blades, depress them. I want you to take your upper arm, just start to pull it away from your sternum, right? You learn how to articulate these things to get them to feel something different. And that's the thing that I've always found to be very, very interesting about in-person training, is people are not only looking to physically feel something, but they want to feel, because of this physical difference and emotional change, which is a serotonin release, like, I accomplished something there. You don't get that through the long distance thing, but you learn how to teach it through the long distance thing by learning how to teach it in person. It teaches that oversimplification process so that you can apply it to even when you're not in person.
It's just like,
and that's the part that I love about it.
100%. It's just like reading an entire textbook, right? And then being able to break it down and then translate it into maybe a sentence or 5 words. I was like, okay, cool. We've got this really complex idea, but now I'm going to say, all right, arms up, arms out, put your arms out, extend the elbow. So what do you mean? Like, blah, blah, blah. You've read a massive book about weightlifting or bodybuilding or whatever it is. And you're just like, yeah, but I want you to do this. I want you to jump. Jump? Yeah, well, you're going to reach triple extension, blah, 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 blah. I want you to jump. Or I want you to press through the ceiling. Okay, cool. So now we're going to get them into an extended position. And yeah, that's where the art of coaching comes in, right? And it's a really funny one. And I completely agree with you. I'm like, look, if you want to start on this whole game, you want to jump into the whole scene of technology and going online, that's absolutely mega. But see someone in front of you. Like, play around. Even if you just, like, quote unquote volunteer, train some of your buddies. Just go to the gym with some of your mates, and half of the session you're training with them, but the other half you put your coach's hat on. You're like, okay, cool. I'm going to be the trainer. I'm going to coach this person right now. How would I want to kind of portray what I want them to do? How am I going to manipulate their actions, what they're doing right now, so I get what I want out of this person, which is a really, really hard thing to do, and even harder online.
Yes, it is hard. It is hard. And it's very niche oriented too, right? Which is why I don't want to say there's a certain way that a person should, there's no blanket way that a person should be taught to exercise, because it's very goal dependent. And based off that goal, we will change things. In my brain, just over time, with the things that I've become passionate about, always goes toward mechanics, because within the mechanics, we can start to refine efficiency. And then if we start to refine that, then we can become more specific about how do we get to that goal. So that's where I always go to. But the reality is, with a person in front of me, the way that I always look at them is I'm like an artist. They are my canvas. And what I need to do is I need to literally, like, I don't know if when you were a kid, but when I was a kid, my grandmother used to give me these really complex connected dots books. All right. It would literally be like 1,000 dots to connect. And I always was really good at, number one, finding those dots, but drawing straight lines to those dots. So when I teach people this concept of isolating a muscle group, that's what I get more from everybody. Like, I can't feel X, Y, and Z muscle. How do I isolate this muscle? That's where I start. It's connecting the dots. We need to have a basic understanding of where does the muscle start and where does it finish. That's dot 1 and that's dot 2. And all we're always trying to do is bring dot one and dot two closer together. Okay. And then that's all I give them. I don't care if you know what an origin and insertion is. I don't care if you know anything about function. But now that you know a destination and now that you know a finish, you know how to move a little bit. Okay. And then that's literally the canvas that I work with. And I might palpate, I might touch those dots and literally just kind of try to groove those things toward each other. But I'll do it through however many reps it takes for that person to start to get that movement down. And without them even knowing, we're going further away from this concept of moving and closer to this concept of contracting. And that's the stuff that I teach. It's not necessarily I'm teaching mechanics, I'm teaching contracting. And I'm using mechanics as my tool to help them become more efficient at contracting something so we can get this energy expenditure going toward that goal set that they want, whatever it may be, right? But that's where it starts. And then you take that same template that you use in person. It's like, okay, here's my canvas. And the way that I always talk to people and say, well, how do I convert that online? Is like, well, if you can't draw it, you can't teach it. So instead of me having that body in front of me, you should be able to draw that body right here and say, hey, here's dot A, here's dot B. This is where that dot's going through space. Do we have an understanding of that? Yeah, I got that, Bryce. Okay. So now show me right now, right? And we'll physically do isometric repetitions there, right? But if I didn't have that experimentation with that body in person, I wouldn't know how to do this element here. That only came from that experience that I had there. And so that's what I find is invaluable. You know, the question is like, is my career behind or ahead because of how much time I spent in person? Well, it just depends on what that measure is. From the skill set, it's far further ahead because of all the time that I had to do in person. And it made the transition from doing less in person to doing more long distance so much easier because I knew what step I needed to do to teach these points that I knew were very valuable for people to have a change physically and then create that emotional, this makes me happy, it's different. And that's what people are looking for.
Totally. And experience is invaluable, right? And it allows you to get inside someone's head to completely understand what they're feeling. I'm like, all right, they're not moving in exactly the same way as I told them to, but I know exactly why. I know what they're thinking. So I'm going to put one word out there, one sentence out there, which completely changes the way they move. And that allows you to sit back from a distance and be able to be as good of a coach as you would do in person, right? Instead of just like smacking one side of them, smacking the other, and then like bringing it together. Like, do you feel this? Like, yeah. I'm like, okay, now do it without me, sort of thing. Now you get to be like, okay, cool. I want you to do X, Y, or Z, and they understand totally. And you're not going to get that if you don't have that experience. You know, earn your craft, earn your stripes, pursue excellence.
Yes, absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah, and simplification, simplification that I think it's important for people to realize that the best thing you can do is master one at a time, and I try my best to reel that back into people. If you're looking to progress forward one big step, let's take three back. Let's master that, that -3 step. Once we have that down like the back of your hand, let's master that -2, then that -1. Now we're back at even. And then before you know it, you're at that level 2, level 3, level 4, much, much more efficient than you were before. And that's the reality. When you're trying to refine any kind of skill, when you're trying to get better at producing results for yourself, your organism is always getting smarter. And the only thing that you can do is try to master ways to continue to give it more, to overload it more. That's what our business of changing our bodies is. Give me something to adapt to. That's essentially what our body, it's not saying that, it doesn't want that. It's just trying not to die. But in order to adapt, that's what you have to do. You have to give it something to where it's like, what are you doing to me? I need to protect myself from that. Well, the more skilled you get, the faster it adapts to that. And you always have to be one step ahead. Yeah. And the problem is, and I've been there before, when you start to learn a lot of things, you get this overload of information. You try to apply it all at once. That's the worst thing that you can do. I know it sounds cool, like you have all the stuff, you want to try it all out, but you have to earn your right to get to these more specific things with mastery. So like in business, mastery over overload, we've heard that a million times, but it is true. Okay. Master step one, make that to where if somebody said, who in here can show me, the basics of contracting your lats Who here can show me a completely shortened lat and contract it at a 10 out of 10? And who's going to be the strongest in that position? You want to raise your hand and say, I got that. I got that, right? That's a very simple thing to do, but you want to be a master at it. And then somebody says, who can show me the completely lengthened lat and be the strongest at it? I got that. I got that. That was the next thing I mastered, right? Okay, now who can show me the best setup or alignment to get your lat through the largest range of motion with resistance and with tension? You say, I got that. I got that. Because after I mastered those two things, I realized that variations of pull downs do that, right? And then it's like, okay, who can tell me after that what's a way to make that more braced or make it more simplified so I can go get more output? You're like, oh, I got that. Let's go to a machine. I don't have to think as much there, right? But until you start to master those concepts, you won't get an idea of how life-changing those things will be to producing a little bit more stimulus and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. So this idea of plateauing or overtraining or reaching your genetic potential, you realize there's no such thing as it. There's just progression.
So true. And it's like, if you want to build a big pyramid, right, you build a really wide base. You don't just build like a base 2 inches wide and just be like, I'm going to go a mile up. I'm like, well, the wind's going to change direction. It's going to fucking fall over. Like, good luck. Like, you have to master those basics and earn the right, like you said, and really go back, strip down to the foundation and like kind of relearn everything you already know, because there might be a tiny little aspect of it that you've either forgotten or glazed over, and you could have been better there, and you just thought, nah, I've nailed it, don't worry, I've got this. And then you go back and think, oh, now I'm looking at it from a fresh head, a different set of eyes, speaking to another person. Okay, you obviously see it differently than everyone else. We all see things differently. And you're just like, oh, okay, cool. Now I'm going to attack it from that angle. Oh, I'm going to look at it this way. And yeah, you really do have to earn the right. And then at the same time, it will feel like shit. Like it goes back to your hard work. It's gonna hurt. Like, you are in the gym, you're trying to change your body, you're trying to add tissue to your structure. It's not going to be sunshine and rainbows, and it's not going to feel like someone's tickling you. Yes, it's going to hurt. Like, get over it, sort of thing. And it is quite funny having those conversations where they turn around and be like, oh, it like really hurts. Is this what's supposed to happen? You just look at them like, well, yeah. Like, what did you expect, mate? Like, oh, they go, oh, that's heavy. Yeah. Like, we have 90% on the board, 90% of what you've ever been able to do in your entire life. Yes, mate. Yes, it's going to feel fucking heavy. Like, let's get the psychological switched on and ready for a fight.
Yeah. And that's what I say to a lot of clients, in the beginning is, they'll come in maybe for the first session, or it'll be the first session that we've actually have something structured where I feel like they're sound enough for us to actually, we're going to have like a legitimate workout on something, third of the body, half of the body, total body, give them the concept. I'll give them the setup, and then we'll go through the workout. They'll be like, oh man, that was just excruciating. I cannot believe how hard it is. Thank God it's going to get easier. And I'm like, no. Listen, this was the easiest workout you've ever had. Yeah. It will only get worse. And they say, well, how is that possible? It's like, well, the body doesn't work the same as you think it would if you were in an aerobic environment. If you go out and you run a mile and you run it at your steady pace, your body's going to get a little bit better at developing mitochondria. It will get better at utilizing energy. It will get better at storing energy. That's its preventative way to do that. Here, you're doing the opposite. You're trying to teach your body to not conserve energy. Right? So take an example of if I was training my quads. The first day that you come in and we train on leg extension, you might be using 20% of your contractile tissue. But then we keep on hammering at them. We build the skill. We train it frequently. We do it 3 times a week. And for some reason, it keeps getting harder, but I'm not really getting any stronger. The weight's not changing. What the heck is happening? My reps are about the same. But I'm getting to failure faster. Like, I don't understand. What, am I getting worse? No, what's happening is your ability to contract, the percentage of contractile tissue that you're actually using is going greater and greater and greater because you're developing that skill. So you're getting more energy expenditure. And that's the stuff that people don't realize that equates on paper to more volume, which is why I am not an advocate of changing stuff on paper hardly at all, unless I really have to. The perfect workout for me is one that never changes. What changes is how good I am at doing that freaking workout. I want that workout to get better every time that I do it. That doesn't mean setting a PR. That means that rep 1, I contracted that pretty hard. Rep 2, I contracted that even harder. Rep 3, I contracted that even harder. I'm reaching this point of fatigue efficiently faster and faster. I'm getting better at energy expenditure, right? And that ultimately, if you do that, you may never have to be a person that puts these advanced training techniques into their training, unless it's like, I had pizza last night and I want to utilize a little bit more calories or something like that. I mean, all the concepts of drop sets and giant sets and supersets and Geronda sets, they're all cool. But they're very advanced. Until we get to that point where we're using a lot of contractile tissue, we don't need them things yet, man. All we have to do is get better at contracting that freaking tissue. And if you get better at contracting that tissue, your workouts get harder and harder and harder.
Yeah,
you hate them more and more and more. I stress more now over a leg day. I'm almost 35 years old than when I did when I was at 22, thinking I was working hard. It's not because I'm getting old. It's because they're freaking excruciating, man. And I didn't understand at the time. I remember watching these big 300-pound bodybuilders, and they do sets of 8 to 12 repetitions at a load that at 22, 23 years old, I wasn't that far away from. Maybe 30, 40 pounds. I'd be squatting about the same thing. And they get out of a squat and they're dying. I'm like, these guys, they're pansies. They don't know how to work hard. Yeah. The reality was they were better than me. They contracted way better than me. And that's something that you'll learn over time. Is efficiency equals pain, right? And that's why mechanics and form, in a sense, is so important. Because if you're a person that is a sadist or a masochist, right? I mean, you kind of have to be, in a sense, if you want to do this thing.
Yeah, you do.
That element right there is what breaks the ice. It's what breaks the ice. It's what changes this concept of like, oh, I work hard, to like, no, I wasn't working that hard. Now I'm working hard, right? And somebody will come along the lines, if you're in the game long enough and you talk to enough people, you get in front of enough people, you train with enough people, somebody or a number of people are going to take you to that point or give you that small little cue in a workout that you're like, oh, dude, that just clicks. And it will give you this aha moment because you'll feel like you're going to die. You will feel like you're going to die. And for me, I had to literally move from Ohio down to Florida to find that. But I knew that was the next step for me. I didn't know how to do it. Everything that I had done up to that point was pretty self-taught. But I knew that there were some guys around here that had an opportunity to train with and work with. And I didn't know what they were going to do to take me to another point. But once I got into the first leg session with them, I'm like, okay, now I get it. I thought I worked hard, but I didn't really work that hard.
I mean, the whole concept of making the same weight feel worse at the same number of reps, you're like, it baffles you, right? Because you're just like, oh my God, like, yeah. I'm regressing here. Like, something's not right. But at the same time, like, being able to contract all the tissue, like, that shit hurts so bad. Mm-hmm. Like, how would you go about teaching someone that?
Mm-hmm. You asking me?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so part of it is a decision, right? I mean, that's the reality. Part of it is a decision. And then part of it at the same time is a little bit of an understanding of the implement or the application that you're using. Like, what's the goal of it, right? So we'll use that example, that leg extension. Well, let's say last week I did 50 pounds on that leg extension and I did a couple sets of 10. In the last set, like, I fatigued on it, burned, and it was uncomfortable. And then I go in this week and I do the same thing, but for some reason on the first set, like, I'm barely able to get to 10 reps, right? I'm going like, well, what the heck changed? Well, maybe without you knowing, you're doing a couple things, right? Well, the leg extension is an awesome opportunity to get those quads to their completely shortened position, which we're talking about a flexed hip and an extended knee, right? If you set up right in that, you get pretty close to that. That part of the range of motion for that muscle is super, super weak. So it's tough to maintain performance long-term in that, right? Which is why I'm not a huge advocate for people that are advanced starting there. But for a person that's just getting used to contracting muscles really, really hard, we're going to go there because your body gets pissed off in that spot. Neurologically, it goes, no, I'm weak here. Get me out of this. I'm uncomfortable. And so if you're getting better in that weak spot, what's going to happen? You're going to get more uncomfortable, right? And then now if we get even more specific about, well, what are the quads really doing here? You know, the leg extension leg is going up like this, right? It hinges in this circular up motion. But do my quads really move up and down during that? Not really, right? What way do they move? They move that patella more toward the hip. That's the way the quads as a unit are kind of pulling. Now we can make the argument some of the fibers of the quads go like this, some go like this, some go like this. But all together as a unit, when they get shorter, they pull that patella or that knee joint toward the hip. So if I take that little concept right there and I say every single rep, I want to get that knee closer to my hip and then closer to my hip and then closer to that hip, you arguably are getting that tissue more contracted and a little more contracted and a little more contracted. So what do you think that the intensity or the perceived intensity rep to rep with that load's what's it gonna feel like? Harder and harder and harder, right? So is the goal in there first to get stronger, or is the goal in there to have so much freaking ownership of every single rep in that short position at that 50 pounds, all 10 repetitions? Is that the goal first before I progress to 60 pounds? Now, I don't know the answer. Like, your goal could be to get stronger, right? But that's where we separate this concept of, am I trying to just get strong, or am I trying to actually train my quads? And if your goal is to like tax your quads, well, we want to expose that extreme, and we want to beat the piss out of that extreme. Like, I want to be a master at holding tension and load in that completely knee extended position, or that top position of that leg extension. And I do that through my thought process of knowing a little bit about the function of the quads, right? But also taking some ownership at the same time that my goal is to contract. It's not to move, it's to squeeze. And that's the way, I mean, as complex as it is, set to set to set, when I'm taking somebody through that, that's the conversation that I'm having with them. I'm reading those repetitions, I'm reading that tempo. Obviously, I'm reading their eyes at that point in time. And I want them, every time they get in that short position, I want to see this here, right? I want to see that spasming start to get worse and worse and worse, because I know at that point in time, that's the nervous system saying to the body and the quads, like, stop it, this freaking hurts, right? And that's the place that we're looking for. I know that's a place to increase efficiency, increase contractile tension, increase strength, increase potential for lactic accumulation, all the byproducts that we look for adaptation and change. Doesn't matter if you know those names or not, it really doesn't matter, but you need to find that pain, right? And the easiest way to find that pain is to have a little bit of a concept of, what's the goal of this exercise? What element am I trying to progress? It's really that simple.
That's fascinating. And this is where I absolutely love the fitness industry, right? Because there's many ways to skin a cat. And I also think if I split it down the middle, right, and go, okay, weight-based ways of training, we've got bodybuilding, and then we got some sort of strength sports. This is where I think strength sports can take a leaf out of the bodybuilding's book. I'm like, all right, you do your whole pushing the weights, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. We've hit that. Yet they have auxiliary or accessory or afters, whatever you want to call it. They have some sort of bodybuilding exercises that they need to do, right? Yet you kind of look over and they're not paying it enough attention as they would have done if they were snatching, deadlifting, or doing whatever. You know, heavy doubles, everyone loves to throw around some heavy weight. Maybe it's that ego talking, who knows? Yet if they take into consideration, all right, if we take that, 50-pound leg extension or whatever it was, but we make it feel like 500 pounds. We make it feel like absolute dog shit. First of all, we've got less stress going through the joints, which is always good for a strength training athlete. And then second of all, you're actually going to get more bang for your buck, which is like obviously what we want. And it's a really fascinating concept of you going, okay, cool. It starts here, it finishes here. All we're trying to do is bring them closer together each time. But I can't try and bring it closer together. Try and bring that patella closer to the hip. Oh, but that's as far as it goes. All right, next set, I want you to try a little bit more, because that 0.1 of a millimeter is going to make a difference. And yeah, it makes it scream, and everyone's been in that position, right, where it starts spasming out, which is a really messed up.
My favorite thing to do with any kind of athlete, anybody that has a little bit of skill, has some experience, is it's important. It is important. It's important for me too, is to be chalked down a notch so that you're reevaluated. It forces you to reevaluate yourself about How seriously are you taking maybe this concept being taught, or, how hard am I really working at this concept? I thought I was, maybe I need to reevaluate that. And, I'll preach it till I'm blue in the face, but that's why I'm such a fan of using isometrics. And I didn't really become as obsessive with those until two things happened. I started having some serious muscular tears. That's what there's really my only option to kind of bring that tissue back to a point of recovery. It's the only thing, it's my only option in my arsenal for that individual muscle group. And number two, I started to have like major lifts, kind of like power lifters do, where I wanted them to get stronger. That was my goal with those. I wanted those compound movements to get stronger. But I had some parts in that range of motion where I just would fail and I wouldn't know why. I just didn't have the strength to push through that. Now you could break them down and say, well, from a mechanical standpoint, this muscle's more the advantage and this one's more not. But still, going and being able to kind of dissect that from the video I was looking at in those compounds and say, well, why don't we just spend more time in this position in a safer environment at teaching my body to contract with more intensity there to see if that would break through that plateau. And guess what happened? It learned how to do it. But it's like everything. You have to retrain that nervous system to say to your body, hey, number one, I'm safe. Number one, or number two, if it's an unstable environment like a squat, I know how to brace and have more safety. And number three, I've been here before with resistance and load, so I can produce power and tension here. And then you start breaking through that stuff. And it's only done through those more isolated environments. But one of the safest ones that I like to use it in is an isometric environment because it allows me to have longer sets. The amount of intense time under tension isn't 2 to 3 seconds like a regular exercise, right? Now it's 90 seconds to 3 minutes. And if I can increase that threshold and I can increase that circulation going to that tissue, I could be making it healthier and I could be making it stronger. And that's what I like about auxiliaries for powerlifters, is even more so than a balance of stress, like letting the nervous system relax a little bit from the big lifts that you guys do, especially on like 90% plus days. That's a lot of taxing on the nervous system. Even if you're only doing one double, you still have to do 10 warm-up sets to get to that double. That's freaking volume on the nervous system, right? So if we can simplify things in the nervous system, we give it a break. But at the same time, what if I added a component in my training that encouraged, we're going to start the recovery process now. Well, what's recovery need? Circulation and nutrition. It's a big part of it. What if I started taking nutrition and like my auxiliary stuff and started doing things that would accumulate a little bit of lactic acid? Not only am I getting that tissue into extremes that it needs strength in to carry over into the compounds, which is important, the Olympic lifts or whatever it may be, but I'm also promoting blood flow. What's blood carry? Nutrients. Where are those nutrients going to go? In that tissue that just got trained. What could that do to my recovery? I could get the recovery process going faster, provided I take myself seriously from a recovery standpoint through the rest of my day. But it's one element I think it's very undervalued in the strength realm is not as much nutrition. I mean, I realize that's another rabbit hole in and of itself. But getting those auxiliary movements to, number one, help with ranges of motion that you're really weak in. But number two, let's start recovering. Like our only goal is to be able to do those big three good. What can I do outside that to make those big three always be ready to roll for the next training session? It's more than just going home and relaxing or taking the next day off. There's more to it. We can do more. We can do more in the training session. I realize training is still stress, but we can use a different energy system to turn that central nervous system off and actually help it to start to recover. And I think that's one benefit of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, if anyone who's ever strength trained and then also done the bodybuilding type of training and different concepts, they will completely agree with us where it's completely different. Like you do a heavy session on the whole strength training side, like you just feel like you've been hit by a train. Like someone's going to slap you in the face and you're going to feel it 5 minutes later because your nervous system is so fucked up. Yeah. On the other side, it's like a specific area is just screaming at you. And you're like, whoa, what is going on? Like my lats are just dying and I'm shaking sort of thing. However, I'm still like cognitively alive. I'm still here.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, okay, cool. You tell me to do like a really hard test, I'll be able to sit down and do it, no problem. But the powerlifting, the weightlifting side, like, nah, they are just mentally tapped out. And I think as we try and push the boundaries of these different sports, right, we're going to start taking aspects and concepts from each and every one and bring them into fruition and bring it into this middle part, right? You see, I mean, Eddie doing the 500, Thor doing the 501. There's athletes that are weighing less than half, pulling 400 kilos, and you're just like, wait a minute, this is some serious like performance in sports. Now I think because we're just trying to nudge the boat out that little bit further, people will start dialing it back, be like, okay, cool, we can only ever do so much at 90%. And if you truly do a double at 90%, you're not going to be touching a 90% for a while, because your nervous system is going to be like, nah, go to bed.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how do we improve, one, recovery, like you said, two, our performance in those big free lifts or the big two with the Olympic lifts, and then three, get better. I was like, well, how do we do that without just loading the weight up and then just crushing ourselves? I was like, oh, well, it's probably going to be taking a concept out of your book and be like, all right, let's dial things back and actually fix those little nuances and the little pieces of the pie that we've just been neglecting for the past 20 years.
Yep. And that's what I appreciated when I started diving into different forms of, coaches that were doing things for very good, whether it's single ply or different power lifters out there. For one, like I appreciated, I don't know how much you dove into what Louis Simmons did with the conjugate method, right? But without him really even knowing a bunch about, mechanics and profile, he just stumbled across this concept where I could use accommodating resistance, and they just naturally started to get stronger, right? And it was all through trial and error, but that's the beauty, is these guys figured it out in the trenches that if I set a band up correctly or I set chains up correctly, yes, maybe I'm still doing the same movement pattern, which could have wear and tear long term. And it did on a lot of those guys that were still in the conjugate method. They did end up getting hurt or getting setbacks, but it wasn't because he wasn't on the right track. Like he was taking, for instance, like let's say a bench press, and they would on a Monday they'd have a bench press session at 90+%, go all out, being doing singles and doubles, right? Well, obviously they're going to be taxed neurologically there. So the concept of coming back Thursday and doing another session of that is slim to none. That would just be stupid. But what if we figured out a way to make, let's say I did 250 kilos on that bench press, and that's what I was able to hold at the top and hold at the bottom and be able to do a double at. Well, what if we just made the top feel like it was 200 to 250 kilos, but it deloaded to 150 to 125 kilos in the bottom? If I implement a band correctly, what I'm doing is I'm giving my body an opportunity to recover at the place where it's most vulnerable, for those pecs, those front delts are fully stretched, fully loaded, super vulnerable in that spot. But when the joints get more stacked, I'm arguably more mechanically strong in the top of that press. So let's overload that part. Now I'm still getting the intensity. I'm still getting the intensity there to continue to maintain or progress this strength over the course of my block up to this meet. Okay. But I'm not intense throughout the entire range of motion. And so that was the beauty of what Louis did with the conjugate method, and then on top of that, if you use undulation, which I appreciated with percentages of your different big three lifts, you can take that an even like a massive step further by kind of like just babying the nervous system to a point where it never gets fatigued at all. It's just kind of always on the cusp of being a little bit recovered, but never under recovered. And that's when performance stays high. And if it's the same thing as hypertrophy training, if you can go in every day and you can have the consistency of your performance always being there, good things are going to happen, whether you hit PRs or not. If you always perform every single rep, every single set, okay, then you're on the right track. So why not do the least amount of volume necessary on paper to yield that result? Because I'm not trying to win that workout. I'm trying to win that year. And it's the same thing with those guys getting ready for a meet. They're not trying to win that workout. They want to go to that meet. They want to set that PR. So let's baby that nervous system through undulation and like what Louis did in a lot of his stuff. And that conjugate method, there's some things that I really liked, and there were some things I was like, I don't think that I would do that if I was helping somebody. But the idea of accommodating resistance, he was really groundbreaking in that, big time.
Yeah, it was brilliant, man. And this is where the art of auto regulation comes in too, right? Because you're like, all right, you're going to
Yep.
do a max effort, or we're going to go until you can't do anymore. It's like, okay, no problem. But today, you might be stressed out your head or only slept 4 hours or whatever. I'm like, it doesn't matter about the weight on the bar. It doesn't matter about any of that. It matters you giving exactly what you can, all of it, right now. If that's 4 reps, that's 4 reps. Do it with the highest intensity you can give me today. If that's 24 reps like next week, that's amazing. But next week is next week, or last week is last week. Auto regulate what you do when you come in the gym. But when you're there, instead of walking and be like, oh, I'm probably not going to feel good today. Yeah, you probably won't. And what you're going to perform and get out of yourself might not be exactly the same as what you've done, previously and hit PRs and stuff. However, you've still got to push past those barriers, what you can give today.
Mm-hmm. And I personally think it's even more important for that crowd, those guys that do those strength sports, because there's this stigma and there's this habit that nutrition comes secondarily, if at all, right? And especially when you're doing stuff to the max, you're going to get some kind of an inflammatory response. Now, there's thousands of inflammatory responses that happen in your body. And it doesn't matter where it comes from. All you need to know is that it's inflammation. It needs to be cleared. And until it goes through that clearing process, your recovery is going to be hampered. And the unfortunate thing with powerlifters, in a sense, I'm not saying all of them, but a high percentage of them, is that since their nutrition lacks, especially from a micronutrient standpoint, they're missing out on these massive minerals on a day-to-day basis that push that inflammation out, right? And so now we're talking about connective tissue inflammation, we're talking about muscular inflammation, and we're talking about organ inflammation. Just three off the top of my head that are massive, right? And if those things are bad, what do you think is going to happen to their metabolic properties? They're going to slow down. And since they slow down, inflammation stays in there from a cellular level. And then what happens to their performance? It goes down. But mentally, what do you want to do? I want to push. So when that performance is in the gutter and I push, what happens? Snap, there's your injury. And that's why we see a lot of those guys have massive injuries toward the tail end of their prep into a meet, is because they're just not doing those little things to help take care of that nervous system. And that's why I'm preaching on the nervous system, is because your diet could be like, let's say, C average at best, maybe, if you just baby that nervous system enough to where it never was over the line, right? But if you beat that thing up every single squat session, every single deadlift session, every single bench session, if you beat it to a piss, okay, with your percentages and having those reps at the high end on those percentage days, then you could be setting yourself up to have that performance in one way, shape, or form, or an injury happen when you least want it.
For sure. You're basically beating the shit out of the one load bearing beam in your house, right? Like if you take that out, like the whole house is going to fall down. And I'm sure everyone has pushed a little bit too much. And the next thing you know, you're sick for like 3 to 5 days. You're like, wait, why am I sick? Like what's going on? And you actually dive back into those diaries that we've been talking about earlier. And it was just like, oh man, like I didn't just push the boat out. I set it alight and kicked it out to sea. I was like, I PR'd by like 30 kilos and then started doing some Atlas stone shit and then did some farmers carries. And you're like, that probably wasn't a wise idea. No wonder I'm ill for the next 5 days. So it's like, yeah, definitely. Like it is your body's control network. Without a nervous system, without your CNS, like we're just like a pile of organic tissue, right? We're not going to do anything.
Well,
yet it's like, no, I need to squat 200 kilos for 5. It's like, okay, cool. That's what your coach might have written down on the line, which again passes some problems, right? Yet they don't know what you did yesterday outside of the gym. Yet they don't know that you're fighting with your boyfriend or your girlfriend right now, so you're sleeping like 4 hours a night on the couch. I was like, oh no, but I need a squat 200 for 5. I'm like, okay, good luck. Like the risk for injury is gonna skyrocket.
Yeah, and that's you bring up a good point there. That I don't want to veer too far off the topic, but honestly, when you have a coach, whether it's long distance or in person, your best coach, or your coach that is going to be most invested in you, is the one that more times than not gives you an answer that you either don't understand or you don't like. And what I mean by that is your coach is always going to talk in almost like a language of, well, it depends.
Yeah.
Right. Because there is, and I talked about this in the program that I just released. Of you've already said it a couple of times, how important auto regulation is, because you have to be able to have this balance of giving good feedback to your coach or making good decisions on your own, and then living with the consequences after from your coach. I would much rather have a client or an athlete come back to me and say, hey, listen, man, like, I know we were supposed to do a 5x5 today on deadlifts or on block pulls, but I literally just did a 2x10, and I did it at sub maximal load, just working on technique, because I got 4 hours of sleep last night. And I go, perfect. We live to fight another day. That's a person that, number one, I know is listening to their body, but hasn't forgotten the long distance goal in mind, right? And it always has to be the balance of both of those, which is why I said earlier, I'm never in the business of winning a workout, right? I'm just always on that continuum of I want to do everything I can to keep changing a little bit every day to get closer to what that long distance goal is. But your best coach is going to be one that probably asks you a bunch of questions in return to your one question. Like, hey, coach, I didn't sleep last night. Should I train today? Okay, what's your body? How's your digestion today? Did you take crap today yet? Okay, what were your last 2 meals like? Did you get those in? All right, okay. What do you feel? Are you bloated right now? Where's your scale at? If they're not asking you a bunch of stuff like that, they're either, number one, not at a level to coach you where you need them to be at, or they're just not invested in you, right? And that's the harsh reality. Now, there are tons of coaches that will do that. There are tons of quality coaches out there, but there's 10 times as many that don't know any better and are always going to go like, well, it's on the plan. You got to train today. Go get it done. And I appreciate that hard work ethic. I do. But there's a time and a place for it. It's not black and white. There is nothing in our world, period, including training, that has this blanket yes or no. It's always, it depends. So when you have a guy in your corner, whether he's your training partner, your best friend, or your coach, and he or she says, I don't know, man, that kind of depends, and then you guys have to have this dialogue back and forth, that's when you know you're in a good place.
Everything in life is a conversation, man, and there is two sides to a coin. And human beings like to deal in extremes, like, oh, I need to go full hell the leather, burn the house down, sort of thing, or I'm not even going to step foot in the gym. I was like, no, I'm too tired. Yeah. I'm like, oh, Jesus. Yeah. Like, there is this like conversation between it, and most of the time between those two extremes is something called life. We all live in it. Like, things happen, shit happens, as we all know. And it is about conversing with your coach and be like, okay, well, it does depend. And like, oh, which one should I do? I was like, both, but also it depends on the day. And like, oh, but I don't really understand. I'm like, well, here's 21 questions and answer them as detailed as you can. They're like, well, I just kind of needed a yes or no. I was like, well, you should have hired a yes man. You know what I mean? Like, it's a bit more, it has a bit more weight to it than that. Like, you can't just be like, yeah, do this and everything's going to be fine, because it could be 90%.
And the reality is that it comes in the application. The lesson comes in the application. Yeah. The lesson doesn't come in the conversation. The lesson comes in the application. So all you can do is kind of put them toward the route to where they're going to get the best lesson of application, right? And then that's the biggest deal. All you want them to do is come back and say, yeah, that worked out really well, or no, I had to change, these couple things, or no, that was a bad idea. Well, you know what? You live and you learn. You write that stuff down. That's the stuff that you remember. I've done a ton. I've spent thousands and thousands of dollars on continued education. That stuff was all good stuff, and I got notebooks upon notebooks of notes, but none of that stuff, I probably have retained 10% of that at the most. But that 10% that I applied has completely changed my perspective on how I train myself and how I train others, because of the value in the application. And that's the biggest advice that I can give people in general, is quit paralyzing yourself with yes and no, and just go. And that's why I said in the beginning, the notebook is so important, because that's where you're going to learn your lessons at. The the concept of having to stop what you're doing, sit down and physically write something is going to help you remember something for the rest of your life. And that will completely change the way that you approach every single training session by naturally just refining what you're doing, right? And if you have that balance of what you do there in conversation with your coach, if you have a good coach that gives you the right concepts and principles, he doesn't give you a yes or no, he just gives you this basis and this groundwork to help you think on your own. That's a pretty powerful thing to have.
That's all you need, right? And then a little bit of work ethic. Well, a lot of work ethic,
Yeah.
but at the same time,
Yes.
just get in, work hard, write down your
Yeah.
shit, and learn the lessons along the way, man. That's so powerful.
Yeah. And the reality is the work ethic's not that hard if you really like it. If you really like it, it's not that hard. Like you want it. And it's okay to say like, this thing's just not 100% for me. Like I'll go and work out, but it's not, it's leisure for me. I appreciate that. I appreciate that honesty.
Yep.
But if you're going to come to me and say, this is what I want to do and I want big change, you got to love it. You got to really, really have this desperation or this passion for it. Because if you don't, you're going to miss the number one element that you need. And that's work ethic.
That's for sure, man. And yeah, there is no harm in saying, hey, I just want to do 3 times a week.
Oh.
It's leisure for me. It's health and fitness. I'm like, that's incredible. That's what you want to do, and you're taking steps towards it, which is fantastic. At the same time, if that same person turns around and goes, oh, well, why don't I look like that? Or why don't I perform like that? I was like, well, mate, like there's so many more things you need to be doing rather than just like dicking around 3 times a week and having a bit of fun with Sally on the treadmill. I mean, yes, congratulations. That's awesome. And you're a healthier, fitter person for it, and probably a lot more mentally sane too. But at the same time, you can't go comparing that to then pushing performance. There's so many more things that go into it.
Yeah. And I'll have a lot of people just genuinely making conversation. I'll say, how long is it taking you to get to where you're at, or look how you look? And, that's a nice compliment. And I'll say, well, I mean, it's been like 17 years now of me never training less than 5 days a week, like never. And they'll go 17 years. Oh, and I'm like, what are you saying that I wasted 17 years of my life? Is that what you're telling me? Like when you're in it, you're in it. You're just in it. You don't care about the amount of time. You're just in it. And if you don't want to be in it, that's fine. If you just want to go and get on the Stairmaster, go do it, man. If that's your little bit of stress relief, it's still good. You don't have to be completely hook, line, and sinker bought into this thing to see some sort of results. But that's where that villain of comparison does come into play, because we have that stuff at our fingertips. It's right there. It is attractive, from a marketing standpoint, it's shoved in our face on TV 24/7. So I get it. Everybody wants to look a certain way. Some people are more gifted to get there faster, but I can guarantee those people that get there and they maintain it, which is the main thing, right? It's like you see these 6-week transformations, but I want to see that person after 12 weeks and then 18 weeks and then 2 years. If they maintain it, the one element that's always there is they're still working. They're still freaking working, man. Right. And if you don't want to work, that's okay. It's okay. But you're not going to have that level of that physique that you're seeing there, because that's the one element that's missing.
Yep. And it's like, hey, the way you train can change, like your goals can change, like all these things can change, but at the same time, the work ethic doesn't. And you're still there working hard day in, day out, whether it's for friggin' lacrosse, like Zumba, yoga, bodybuilding, weightlifting, doesn't matter, sanity, for sanity.
I haven't competed in 3 years, and I still train like I'm getting ready for a show. I don't know any other way. I just like to train. Right. Yeah. So I'm not saying that's the way, but when you find something that you like, or you find something that you're really bought into, you don't care about the work. You kind of want it. It just it centers you. It just becomes your one part of your day where you're in your element. And I hope for everybody, whether it's training or running or doing a triathlon or an Ironman or whatever it is, health related, like I hope that they find that. But that's got to be the element. Like you just don't care about the time or the years or the amount of hours wasted, because it's not wasted time. It's quality time of you molding yourself into something that you visualize you can be physically or mentally or whatever it may be. And that's the beauty of fitness. That's why I've loved it, because it does on all aspects of the human nature, it gives back to you everything that you want to give into it. You just need to decide, how much do you want to give?
Yep. And it never ends, right?
No.
And that's the beauty part. I think that's the addictive part, because we're always chasing an end which will never come. And if you want to go spiritual with it, Buddha says happiness is the journey, it's not a destination. And it's, you can take that and apply it to any realm in the world, right? And it's so friggin' true. Like, you're like, all right, the actual process of going out to your garage or going to the gym and training, that is what you end up falling in love with, because that helps upstairs, that helps the physiological, that helps goals, that helps you just de-stress, socialize. That is what you end up falling in love with over time, rather than be like, oh, I look good in the mirror in the morning when I'm dehydrated and I've been working for like 3 weeks, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, great. Like, but then drink a pint of water and you're going to look a bit different. Like, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, it's gone. I was like, well, yeah. Like, what do you expect? So yeah, it's really funny.
You had it, but you really didn't have it. You
Yeah.
had the decimated version of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
And that's the thing, man. Like I think people, there's this stigma that, working out isn't fun. And there's just elements or levels to it. And you just need to find that, more than anything, that's always that's always the theme that I try to roll back to is, yes, some of the stuff that I teach may have a very complex title to it. And then I try to take that complex title and simplify it so you can apply it, because I love the application part. That's where I learned everything that I know, is when I applied it and got in the trenches and had trial and error, had some wins, and had a lot of losses. That was the beauty and the fun for me. That's my fun, is the experiment. But at the end of the day, I'm always trying to teach people that it's never about right or wrong. It's never about the right way or the wrong way, because there are a million ways to skin this cat. And we have thousands and thousands of examples of people doing it different ways and still building pretty awesome physiques, whether it's athletic or strong or bodybuilding. There's a bunch of different recipes. But the one thing there that always has to be is that you like it. You kind of look forward to it at some point in time. Once you get over the hump and it becomes a priority and it becomes a habit to you, it should just be it should be a part of you, right? And so forget about the right and wrong. Like you go in, you have a bad workout, you're like, well, I learned from that was wrong, won't do that anymore. That's the fun of it. Like, enjoy it. Okay. And so that's the thing that I always try to reel it back, is I was that guy that was obsessed with, like, no, what's the right way for me to do this? Like, I don't want to waste any time. You're going to waste time, man. It's just part of it. All right. But the big thing is you should never waste any amount of energy on being unhappy with wasting that time. You should be happy in the fact, like, I'm in this thing, man. I'm just in it. I like it.
So true, man. I absolutely love that. That's fired me up. I want to go train straight away.
I hear you.
Right, man. I really appreciate your time. I won't keep you any longer. I know you're going to have to go straight back in, diving into work. So I really, really appreciate your time, man.
Of course, man. It's been a pleasure. I'm happy you had me on. I hope anybody that watches enjoys too. It's just always love talking shop. So anytime I can, I'm more than happy to.
Always. That's why we do what we do, right? Like, so passionate about it. If you want to chat shop at like 1 o'clock in the morning, you're like, all right, I'm going to need a strong coffee, but I'll get there, sort of thing.
Exactly. I'm with you there.
Yeah, man, I love it. So I really appreciate your time, man. And if you're ever down this way in New Zealand, hit me up.
Oh, I will, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, door's always open, man.
Awesome. Well, same to you, man. You get to Tampa, to the warm weather, we'll get a session in together.
Oh, legend. All right, man. Take it easy. Thank you very much.
All right, buddy. Yeah,
Peace.
of course, bud.